A lot of stuff going on here.
And this meeting is, everyone's in live for council and for staff, but it is also on the township website and virtually available. So with that, do we have a motion to adopt the agenda this evening's meeting? Moved by Councillor Willis, second by Councillor Ennis. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion has passed. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof this evening? Seeing none. We have a staff report this evening with an update on the Community Hub project. And I see we've got some staff up here. You have a presentation to provide. Please proceed with that this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. So excited to be here to provide an update on the Community Hub project and just give a quick rundown on how the public engagement went for the last few months and provide a bit of an update as to where we're going and when you'll be hearing from us next. So a bit of an agenda today. Not quite.
Let's point this one out.
We're good. Had to happen once. So a bit of an agenda for today, because there are a few new members of council, we figured it would be appropriate to give a bit of a history on how we got here, talk about some of the constraints that we're working within, and then also the project delivery method that we're employing. We'll then go into public engagement, so talk about the framework that we follow for the engagement this time around. Go over some of the feedback we received and how we're going to incorporate it into the project moving forward. And then finally, we'll close off with some next steps and timelines. So I'll do my best to stop throughout the presentation and ask if there are any questions, but if I forget or if there's anything really pressing, please feel free to just chime in and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I will point out I do have Mr. Chris Burbage from MJMA, the project architect. He's the lead on this project in the audience. He will be speaking to the project as well at some point. So hopefully the technology will cooperate there. Is that good? Perfect. So a bit of background, project history. So this actually started all the way back in 2017 when the 10-year Loyalist Township Parks and Recreation Master Plan was commissioned. The master plan covered all the parks and recreation needs for Loyalist Township over a 10-year period. So specifically, it did talk about the WJ and Recreation Center and the different amenities that would be needed at that location to address the future growth of the community and make sure that the levels of service that were expected at the time would be met into the future. So based on that study, which did incorporate a fair amount of public feedback in itself, the township commissioned a feasibility study and a recreation master plan for the site of the W.J. Henderson Recreation Center specifically, to look at can everything that was mentioned in the rec master plan be accommodated on the site, and then also take it a step further to see how many amenities we could actually provide on this location to make sure that it would create a one-stop shop for residents. So you'd be even able to go for a swimming lesson and then go pay your taxes or pick up garbage tags or dog tags or anything like that. So it really takes a larger lens approach to the site. And it's also like a multi-phase approach to how are we going to provide all these services at that location. So we commissioned that study in 2018 and finished it later that year. MJMA Architects was the architect on that file, and through the procurement process that we set up for the project or for the study, we did have a provision in place that would allow them to stay on this file subject to satisfactory performance, which is why we're still seeing them here, because their work has been quite exemplary. So we're really happy to have them on board as a partner, and I look forward to keep working with them on this application or on this project. So in 2021, staff submitted an application to the Green and Inclusive Community Building Fund, the retrofit stream specifically. Well, we submitted applications to both. but the retrofit stream is the one that we're looking at today, to fund the expansion of the W.J. Henderson Recreation Center with a focus on the aquatic facility and the accessibility of the site. Moving on to 2022, in April of 2022, the pool had to be shut down for good, just because it could not be remedied anymore, and the damage was just too substantial to keep it operational safely. So the decision had to be made to shut it down, which really created a need to accelerate that first phase of the community hub project to get aquatics back to the facility because of how vital it is to the communities. And then happily in December of that same year, so December of last year, the township was successful in its application to the GICB program, which is going to provide $16.5 million in funding towards the project. So that takes us to the end of the 2022 calendar year. So what's actually involved in phase one? So as it was described in our application and as per council's direction, the first phase of the community hub project involves the construction of a new aquatic facility. And we'll go over some more details of what's involved in that phase later. Accessibility upgrades, the creation of a legacy space, and also, as well as energy conservation measures in the facility as a whole. So getting right into it, the aquatic portion of the project involved the construction of a new 8-lane, 25-meter pool, as well as a construction of a leisure pool. So it's shown on your screen right here, it's circled. And then the old pool hall is being proposed to be converted to change rooms and administrative space. So we are working within very limited space constraints. So it's a matter of figuring out how much can we fit in this space to provide the level of service that's expected from the community. We then move on to the arena portion of the project. So as part of life cycle works for the facility as a whole, we are proposing a new arena pad, boards, and glass. So this is work that needs to happen regardless of the community hub project. This equipment has reached the end of its useful life and needs to be replaced in the next 2 years, as identified in our asset management plan. And then we're also looking at mechanical upgrades to the change room area, and then accessibility upgrades here as well. Moving on to the main lobby. So we'll be using the term social heart here a lot. And really the reason we chose that is because it really refers to a place in the center where the community can come together and celebrate and tell stories and just gather as a community. So we figured that the term social heart would be quite appropriate here. So looking at a floor plan over here. So everyone recognizes that triangular entrance that's almost iconic to the site. So going through the front doors, you'll see the front desk circled in your screen right now. So people would work their way over the front desk and be greeted by a customer service representative. The existing front desk would be converted to canteen space. The washrooms would be renovated and retrofit to be accessible. Two multi-purpose rooms that could be joined into one would be created, and where the empty space currently is. And then you can see some accessible viewing into the arena. So there's two different concepts being proposed here. The middle one that's detailed on the right of your screen is an in-arena wheelchair viewing area that can allow people to be within the rink and watch the action on the ice. Whereas the one on your left of your screen is in the hallway, but it does provide that same viewing behind the glass to the arena. So the first one we are trying to incorporate to the project, whereas the second one is potentially sponsorship dependent or funding available, or depending on the funding availability of funding, because there's obviously a cost associated with this. So one of our goals as a project team is to make the facility accessible for everybody. And we feel that this is a very good way of doing it. Hockey is obviously a very important part of our identity as a community, and we want to make sure that it's accessible to everybody. So for someone who's standing where that little eye icon is, this is what the facility would look like. This is a rendering of the model that we have right now. And if you were to move somewhere else, it would look like that. So very open space, very inviting, and conducive to gathering as a community. And then the last part for the social heart itself is the inclusion of the legacy space. So we partnered with the Gore Downey Chani Wenjack Fund, which is an organization who, among other things, helps facilities and organizations create legacy spaces in their buildings. And the purpose here is to educate and spread awareness about local Indigenous history and our journey towards reconciliation. So when we were putting our application into the GICB program, we figured this would be a really good partnership and a really good way to advance reconciliation in Loyalist Township and celebrate Indigenous communities that are specific to the area. So the original plan proposed converting the library conference room to a dedicated legacy space, and that's still the plan, but we thought we could also take it a step further, which if I go back a slide, the orange highlighted areas is just wall space, and we thought this would be a really good opportunity, as well as everywhere else in the facility, to display our history, not just from the 1800s on, but also going back millennia. So really that open space that we have can be thought of as a canvas to just represent Loyalist Township for everyone. And that goes back to that whole point of inclusivity. So the last point is energy conservation. So as part of the GICB program that we are receiving, we do have to meet certain requirements, and one of those is reducing our energy emissions or greenhouse gas emissions for the facility by about 30%, or at least 30%, sorry. We are going to try to take it a step further and target a net zero ready facility, but this is something that will be worked out through later phases of the design. But overall, the goal is to reduce our energy consumption. Anyone who's looked at our bills will be able to tell you that the W.J. Henderson Recreation Center is a bit of an energy hog, which is normal for a facility that A, has a pool, B, has an arena, and C, is 40 years old or more. So through these retrofits, we will be able to bring those costs down, as well as reduce our energy emissions and our greenhouse gas emissions, sorry. So I'll just do this last slide, and then we'll take a quick break for questions if needed. But really the thing to keep in mind with this project is actually it's extremely complex. We are trying to build a new aquatic facility on an active site, effectively increasing the footprint of the facility by 30%, which is no easy feat, but then also incorporate everything that I just talked about, which takes us to our next point, which is these things are expensive, so we need to figure out a way to maximize the value of the taxpayers' dollars to deliver a facility that works and is efficient. And the last part, which Carrie likes to remind me of, is the schedule. Get this done. Get this done as quickly as is reasonably possible. Especially for the pool, the closure of the pool in April 22, combined with the pandemic closures since 2020, really hurt the community in terms of access to aquatic programming, and there is really a need to bring this back as soon as possible. This is something that we are quite cognizant of, and we are trying to move as quickly as we can while still making sure that we're doing our due diligence. And the last part is, despite the pool being closed, the arena is very much still active. And what we need to make sure is that the user groups itself aren't disrupted the same way the aquatic user groups are. So another main constraint that we're working towards is making sure that the facility remains operational during construction for as long as possible. So all the work that I mentioned for the arena, trying to schedule that during the off-ice season between April and August, so that arena user groups are not impacted. As you can tell, there's a lot of constraints that we're working towards, but I think this is a good place to stop for questions and check in quickly.
Thank you. Council, any questions on the information provided so far? Seeing none? One second.
Actually, your worship.
Yes.
Thanks for practice. Well, you're taking a drink there, and I'll ask it now, and it may come up down the road. In terms of replacing the arena floor pad, what's the best case scenario in terms of timeline on that to do that project?
So when you say timeline, do you mean duration of the work or year that is going to happen in?
Duration of the work.
I believe 4 months is what we've been told. 4 to 6 months to be on the safer side is a reasonable gap.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from council? Seeing none, please proceed.
Thank you. So because of how complex this project is, as a township team, we talked about it in length, and to figure out the best way to actually deliver it in a manner that met all of the requirements, all of the community's requirements, and settled on a newer project delivery method. So we'll be talking about this a lot. So integrated project delivery, IPD, is a newer way to deliver large scale projects. It might be familiar to anyone who read the news. The city of Kingston does deliver the third crossing or the Woodlawn third crossing using this method. So really what it is, it's a collaborative approach to the project. So instead of us sitting down with the architect and putting very detailed designs together and tendering the project, only to be hit with 12 change orders the day the tender closes, the way IPD works is you actually bring the contractor on board during design. And that gives you that knowledge from the person building the facility of all the things that could go wrong and how to mitigate them so that you can stay on schedule and stay on budget. And most importantly, in the planning phase of the project, because the people building the facility are actually helping you design it, the level of confidence that we can have on our estimates is a lot higher than they would be if we were just to sit down now and do a square foot estimate, which is how we would usually go about this. So this collaborative approach really spreads out the risk across the owner, which is the township, the designer, which is the architect, and the contractor, who's the contractor. And really this promotes innovation. It brings everyone into the same room together to find ways to deliver a project in a manner that's as innovative as possible, while also providing really good value for money and good amount of confidence in terms of schedule. So because of that, we thought that would be an ideal for a complex large scale project of this magnitude, which is why we came to council last fall, looking for authorization to proceed with this project delivery method. We've been proceeding with it since. So as a bit of a background on IPD, there's 4 phases to the IPD project delivery method. The first one is the project validation phase, and we'll go into detail about that in the next slide. But really throughout this process, the IPD team, so the contractor, the owner, the designer, and other IPD parties as determined, work together to validate the project and figure out, is this possible? How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? At that point, we'll just go into details later, but the next phases are procurement and design, construction, and warranty. So during project validation, the IPD team will establish target project cost, the incentive pool. So the incentive pool is, as the title says, it's an incentive to deliver the project at the target cost, and any cost beyond that puts the incentive pool at risk. So everyone is really incentivized to make sure that the estimates are accurate and that the construction is being done at that level. And then the IPT team will also work on establishing timelines, determining the risks, and then coming up with a work plan. This will allow for the development of both a validation report and a business plan. So in the validation report, it will talk about the project costs, it'll talk about project timelines, it'll talk about the risk associated with it and the major milestones. And then in conjunction with that, we'll be developing a business plan, which will speak to how much it will cost to both construct the facility, but also operate it and how to fund the construction and its operation. So with these 2 documents, council will be able to really make an informed decision on whether or not this project is something that we should be proceeding with. So upon presentation of the validation report and the business plan, council will have 2 options: either accept the validation report and the project will then proceed, or reject it, at which point the project will end and everyone goes their separate ways. So you can expect this. We'll go over timelines later. You can expect this in the second half of the year. Any questions on anything that we've covered so far?
Council, any questions for staff?
Through your worship, just can you maybe just expand a bit on the idea of the incentive pool? Is that like a bonus or,
Yeah, so good question. So there's a few different ways to look at it depending on the contract type, but really, so the target project cost is if everything goes according to plan, the facility will cost this much. And then there's all the different ways that it could go wrong, and each of those risks has a monetary value to it. So you add that up, and that creates the profit pool or the incentive pool. So I should specify the target project cost is how much it would cost to build the facility with all the different partners working at base cost without any profit. So the incentive pool is the profit that they would make. So for example, a regular project, the contractor would determine their costs, tack on 10 to 15% as profit, and that would be your target cost. Whereas now, the target project cost is, the township working at cost, the designer working at their cost plus overhead, and the contractor working at their cost plus overhead, and the incentive pool is their profit. But if things go wrong, that profit pool gets smaller and smaller.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions on that?
I do. I'll have follow up on that one. So that risk pool, that's available for both the contractor and the consultant, or
Correct.
just the contractor?
Contractor consultants.
Okay. So in theory, if there was a series of milestones, deadlines, and they were missed, the contractor and the consultant could be working for base cost until they hit a milestone that they were successful at?
Yeah, it depends how the contract is structured. If milestones are missed, then one can assume the project would be going late and people would be working more. So that would really eat into the pool that way, if that makes sense. Right, because you're paying crews to work more time than you had anticipated for. So your
Okay.
incentive is to not do that.
Okay. Any other question? Councillor Willis?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, with that incentive pool, is there a quality component to that, not just time, because quality can suffer if all we're focused on is time?
Yes, absolutely. And through you, Mr. Mayor. So because of the collaborative approach of this contract, of this delivery method, we're all sitting at the table together. So decisions are made by consensus. So it's not a matter of just one of the parties saying we're going to cut corners and no one's going to notice. Like, everyone is at the table and has the same goal, which is to deliver a project that meets everyone's needs. So township representatives will be at the table every single step of the way, auditing books, looking at, making suggestions and really saying, like, these are our minimum criteria that have to be met. And it's not just the project, just engineering. Like, everyone is involved. Carrie and her team have been involved in the process throughout. So everyone is certainly at the table, looking at delivering this project as well as possible with the best value plan for the community.
One more.
Please.
Going back to the accessible seating in the arena and being behind glass or being inside the arena. And I know you don't have exact numbers, but is it an extreme difference in cost? Because it seems it's more inclusive to have people in the arena.
Yeah, so people, through you, Mr. Chair, so people in the arena is really what we're looking to do. That's like oh, you mean the incremental cost of, right. That's a good question. Ultimately, it's about knocking down the wall and building onto the concourse a little bit. So the incremental cost, I don't think, would be too different. It's just, it might impact building HVAC things,
Okay.
which I can't really speak to all that well. Once we bring Mr. Burbridge on, he might actually be able to speak to that better than, well, there he is. Chris, would you like to talk?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. I think it's 6 of one, half dozen of another in terms of in or out on that section. And in fact, having people inside the arena, like the image on the right, it's probably a little simpler, in fact, because we don't have to make that little roof area to enclose the space like the one on the left. So if there was a choice and a preference, you could always do more of one or the other. Does that help?
That cover your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Councilor Parks.
Thank you. Through the mayor to staff. The integrated project delivery, has the township done this type of program before?
No, the township is not, that's, the township hasn't done a massive.
Yeah.
Right? So certainly, this is certainly new to us. Part of what we are looking for in a contractor team is someone who has that experience and will be able to lead the IPD team as a whole. So that was certainly a big part of the evaluation criteria, is how the experience of the contractor with IPD projects. So yeah, not going to lie, it is certainly new to us, but because of the complexity of this project, we really feel that it's the best way to make sure that it gets delivered on time and on budget.
Yes, please.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna add that we're also doing our due diligence and researching it. We've reached out to City of Kingston and other users of the contract to, find out whatever information we can from them. We've reached out to lawyers to help guide the process, which Randy will speak to in a few slides as well. So this isn't something that we're just charging into by any means. We're doing our due diligence all the way along.
Thank you. You kind of lead into my next question. With the City of Kingston, were they successful with this project with their crossing? Okay,
Yeah, it was delivered on time and on budget.
perfect. Thank you.
And just to note that third crossing, that was through the COVID as well, through
Mhm.
the pandemic, which was a feat in itself, probably. Any other questions or comments from council? Just a question, are you getting in further into the IPD process going forward, or would you like the comments now from?
Around the contract project delivery.
Yes.
That would be good. We'll be talking about the procurement process a little bit later.
Okay.
Itself.
I don't have so much a question other than it's completely new, of course, to me too, but I'm intrigued by it. Too many times you see projects that are designed and then when it goes to construct, there's concerns and the designer's already off-site. And so it's field fit, retrofit, and it's always at an additional cost and you don't get the same integrity in the product either. So this really intrigues me. I did kind of watch the third crossing go in and just observe what I could, and the process seemed to work very well. So with a product this size, to be able to have all the players at the table right from the start, in my mind, at this point, seems like we will end up with a far better product, a far more constructible product, and one that should be on time and potentially on target for cost as well, considering that the person that's building it or the company that's building it is at the table during the design. A lot different than our staff deciding constructability when it's actually the company that will be constructing it, sitting at the table. So I'm very intrigued by this, and I expect it will go well. I'm looking forward to the results. So that was my little spiel. Please carry on.
Thank you. So that brings us to present day. We went through the public engagement more than a bit, and we'll be continuing to do so moving forward. But really, the purpose of what we spent January and February doing was to inform the public. Consult. Thank you. That's consult and involve them in the process. The wording's hidden behind floating heads. So our goals here were to build project awareness, present the conceptual plan, solicit input, and make updates to the program based on what we heard. So in terms of building project awareness, we commissioned some billboards, we took out newspaper ads, radio ads, social media posts, and just did everything we could to get the word out that we were solicited, or we were going through public engagements, really to maximize the number of people that would be able to attend the open house. We then went into presenting the conceptual plan. So we did that through a series of workshops. So we held one workshop with arena user groups on January 10th. We held another one with aquatic user groups on January 11th. We started with an introductory workshop with Indigenous groups last month. And then we were at the open house itself. So really lots of opportunities to get the conceptual plan in front of people, because really the conceptual plan was our best understanding of the recreation master plan and the feasibility study, saying these are all the things that what the master plan told us. So this is how we think it should look. But really what we want to know is, does the community agree and does this meet their needs? So people who attended the workshops, or who came to the open house, were able to give input either directly by face-to-face with staff or by using storyboards. And then everyone had the opportunity to answer the online survey that was posted for the duration of January. And then we also created a separate survey to get input from the younger people in our community. So we reached out to to Ernestown Secondary School, created some surveys that were directed towards youths, just so we could get their input. And then based on that, we were able to make some updates to the program, which we'll cover in a second. So in terms of timelines, we spent November and December just getting the word out, making sure people knew that this was coming, so that by the time January rolled around, we were able to host as many people as possible at the open house on the 16th. And then on January 10th and 11th, like I said, we had those different workshops, Indigenous consultation on in February. So what did we hear? A lot. 600 people, more than 600 people responded to the survey. The overwhelming majorities, more than 90%, lived in Loyalist Township, which was good. But we also have respondents from the city of Kingston, Napa and Easton. We also a bit of representation from surrounding municipalities as well, but it was primarily Loyalist Township residents. And then we also got direct feedback from workshops and the open house. So from collating all the comments and all the survey results, we just break down the feedback in 7 different categories. And the first one being the pool, the design of the pool itself. So pool length. The proposed concept has a 25-meter 8-lane pool. We did hear a lot of feedback for a 50-meter pool. And so, sorry, this section is just presenting what we heard. We'll go over our comments then in the next section. Making sure that the pool was designed to PENA standards, so that's the governing world body of aquatics. So making sure that the pool was designed to meet their requirements, so that competitions would be able to run. And suppose a competitor broke a national record in the facility, it would count because it was designed to the right standard. So we were asked to make sure that that was incorporated into the design, and then finally, and you'll hear this theme a lot, making sure that the pool was accessible. So that was the lap pool itself. Taking a step back to the aquatic facility as a whole, there was a lot of desire and need from the community to have community programming. So what I mean by that is open swim programs, parent taught programming, swimming lessons, aquafit. So really all the things that people from the community like to do. So a lot of requests for that. Making sure both pools had adequate seating for viewership, especially on the competitive pool or on the lap pool, sorry, to make sure that during competitions people can come watch. So we heard that a few times. Features, a lot of requests for slides, like a lot of requests for slides, which is interesting. But certainly something that we'll be looking at, and going back to that theme of accessibility, making sure that everyone, regardless of their abilities, can use the pools. And then pool changer gets its own category because there was a lot of feedback on that one. So the proposed pool program that we talked about was talking about a single universal change room with dedicated change stalls. There was a bit of concern from the community on that, just in terms of safety and change. And some desire to see a 3 separate change rooms, so male, female, family. And again, going back to making sure that the change rooms are safe and accessible, and we'll go over that, how we address that again in the next section. And then moving on to arena programming. So a lot of interest in special events in the arena. So concerts, trade shows, things along those lines. off ice season programming, so lacrosse, pickleball, basketball, really for that 4 or 5 month period where the ice is off, making sure that we can still offer programming because it's a really big space that can be used really well. So we heard that a lot. Making sure that handrails are placed in the bleachers, and then a mini stick facility so that people who children who have siblings playing hockey have something to do during that time. Moving on to the multi-purpose room, so lots of interest in that. They were really well received. The community said that they'd be interested in arts and crafts programming there, like fitness activities, and using it as a meeting space, which is generally what these things are used for. So really good to see that it was well received. And then the social art aspect, again, really popular. People thought that this would be a really good opportunity or a good way to celebrate the community through rotating art displays, and then celebrating artists and celebrating Indigenous communities. So again, exactly what we were hoping they would say. We got a lot of really positive feedback here. And then food services were also quite popular for the social art. So the canteen that's designed would be well suited for that. And then finally, a few general comments that really didn't fit in the other 6 themes, but are worth mentioning because they came up a lot, was that people want to see a walking track, a gym or a fitness studio. And then transit, something that we heard a lot is that people from surrounding areas within Loyalist Township couldn't actually make their way to the facility because we didn't have the adequate transit for them to make their way there. So that's just something we wanted to flag. Accessibility we talked about a lot, and then affordability and making sure that programming was affordable for everyone. So that would be a good spot to stop for questions before we go into design updates.
Okay. Any questions on the public engagement? Councilor Broderick.
I would say the public, I went to both sessions, it was great, and I commend you as a group for putting in some of the less than positive comments on the report. I don't know if it's the right time to ask a couple questions, but just to connect the rink and the pool with bathrooms and change room. So, and I should ask earlier, in the rink design, is that bathroom a male, female? What's the setup? It's on the graph, it almost looks like there's separate stalls and a common wash station or whatever you call it.
Yeah, so that's how it's being proposed right now. So individual stalls with a common wash station. And there's also a separate smaller washroom that's purely for accessibility purposes.
Okay.
So it's a little bit bigger, and a single space that's bigger for and universal in that way.
And did you get any kind of feedback on that concept? That's sort of one that sort of, you know, it was there, but
Yeah, we honestly didn't hear much on that one. A lot of the feedback on that was specific to the aquatic change room for the main lobby area, for the social art. We didn't hear a whole lot.
can I keep going through you?
Yeah. Finish your line of questioning.
Okay, I got a bunch of, but I think you answered this, but just to confirm, sort of in the asset management, you talked about the 10-year capital plan. So some of that becomes parceled into this whole concept, right? It's already maybe been budgeted for, or there's some money there to do that. It'll just roll into the whole project.
Yeah, so good question. Yeah, the mostly the stuff around the arena. So the pad, the board, the glass, those are things that are identified in the asset management plan. I wouldn't say they're budgeted for now, but regardless of whether or not this project moves forward, those activities will need to get done.
Sorry, just to clarify, they are in the 10-year capital plan.
Okay, good. That's a great answer. Just a question on the FINA standard. So the national, international swimming, what kind of cost might that add to the project, or are we not at that stage yet?
Yeah, I might defer to Mr. Burbidge on this one, so I don't say anything wrong.
No, I mean, we're gonna get into the, sort of what's required from the kind of the body that will permit regional meets at this facility. But for the most part, the FINA requirements that are about the physical pool basin are already being accommodated in the plan. They're not really affecting the pool to a great degree that has any cost to it. The big one comes down to deck space and viewing space. And I think we're very close on the numbers being requested for spectator space. I think you have to get to 200 people minimum. And I know that was a big issue for a lot of people to get enough people in for viewing. There is a requirement for deck space for the teams. And I think there are some numbers there that were deficient and would require more physical space. And that is something we're trying to get to the bottom of now with the kind of governing bodies that would condone meets at this facility to make sure we can we meet all the requirements. That's the only one I could see as an increase in area for teams on the deck.
Thank you. And just one last, is it fair to say in a lot of the comments at the end, and did you take the, I guess I should ask this first, the yellow stickies, are they part of the comments, sort of the list that goes on and on? Yeah.
Yeah, so yes, they are in that list, and separate from that list, we have like a running list of things that we've heard to make sure that we don't lose track of them or lose sight of them throughout this process.
Okay, and this is, I'm just gonna make this statement and just tell me if I'm way off here or not. So in those comments, you sort of had two sort of various, you had the capital, you know, we need a pool, obviously. But then you had the programming on the other side, which maybe is something that in a sense is almost separate from the capital expenditures that, you know, we're looking at, and that's something that can be addressed as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was a big part of the reason we wanted to get out to the public at this point is one of the questions we wanted answered is what do you want to see in this facility, but also how do you want to use it, so that once it is operational, we know how to program it in a way that will meet the needs of the facility, rather than having to go out again in however many years' time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from council? Seeing none, please proceed.
Perfect. So what are we going to do with everything that we heard? We again broke this down into several different categories. So the first one are things that we can address right now in conceptual design, and that mostly pertain to the aquatic change room. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Burbidge on this one to go over the changes from the original design and how we went about addressing the concerns that we heard. So Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. All right. Here, what we're seeing on the screen is the original proposed fully universal change room setup. This is a kind of methodology, a model that we're using on most of our new facilities, but not all of them. And it certainly does depend on the community and the use and the plans being considered. On this item, there was certainly passionate input on the during the engagement sessions, and so I'll walk through this layout, and then we'll just look and see at a proposed alternate that we're looking at right now. This basically applies universal change room facilities, basically genderless change facilities throughout two sides, two halves that are joined together. And when you're doing that, you're basically you have a common shower area that leads onto the deck. And this is a shower area where you definitely want to be in your bathing suit while you're using that shower, because you've gone and changed at a private cubicle, and then you've gone in your bathing suit to the shower and then onto the deck. Okay, next slide. And then, or one back, we have the option to subdivide this change room facility so that you have, two halves, and you could actually almost start to imagine it being used in a gender specific way. And in these situations, what we do is provide blinds and closures to keep any views from into the change room occurring, and then it provides a little bit more privacy. However, you still have the shared shower area leading onto the deck at that point, at which point you need to be in a bathing suit. There's also some duplication to this layout because you're doing it so that it could be subdivided into two. So there's a duplication of a universal washroom facility that you can see there on the left. And there's some duplication of washrooms like toilet stalls, because you're trying to accommodate it broken down into two different sides. Next one. This just indicates the kind of distribution through those two halves, two doors that you come in down a main shared corridor, past the security desk in the main lobby from the social heart that Rami spoke of earlier. And then you circulate into one of two sides. And then again, out onto the deck through that shower. Next one. Now, this is the proposed alternate, which is basically a return to a male-female setup, but we're flanking those around a universal core. So the plan here is to come into a shared corridor for everybody. And when you come into that place, then you basically have the option to go to flanking gender-specific change rooms on either side. And that's, you see that in the orange and the red, or orange and yellow bars on either side of the green. The green is the kind of universal change room, again, with that same concept of private stalls and a shared shower facility. Here's where you see the three showers. So again, if you've gone to the top one, you have a unique shower, specific to a gender, and then private sight lines from the deck, that so you can shower without your bathing suit on and then head out onto the deck. The green remains the kind of in bathing suit shared universal setup, and the yellow is again another private shower on the bottom. And these arrows just indicate that kind of movement through. But what's interesting about this model, which is different than I think any model we've done where we have three types for other facilities, that you still come into the shared space. So there is a kind of sense of, I think, universality in this layout. And then if you're in need of going to a gender specific change room, and that's where you're more comfortable, you have the option to do that. And even within those rooms, there are private washroom stalls, and there are two private change cubicles, also barrier-free change cubicles in both of the male or female sides. And those can also be changed. Those could be signed for a team. They could be used in different ways as well. But I think day to day, they would be a male, female, and then your center block there, you can see all the banks of private change cubicles. Also one universal, so we kind of save on that efficiency. And we've maximized out as much locker space and showers and washrooms and change cubicles. We don't get as many private change cubicles as you do in the original version, but you're making up for it in a way with those banked change benches in both the male and the female sides. Next.
I think that's it, but maybe we want to just pause here for questions before we do that.
Council, any questions or comments? Councilor Prater.
Through your work, so I just have one question. So one thing I read as I read your report was people who are, let's say parents who want to access for a swim meet, they won't have to go through this. There could be an alternative hallway. I think it's at the top, correct? Okay, thanks.
Councilor Wells.
Through your worship, and I believe this was adequately answered, but just want to underscore it, the fact that people will have the option of going into the non-gendered change room without having to cut through one of the gendered ones.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilor Ennis.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So it looks like for the alternators B, there's a drop in, I think, 8 private change rooms. And is there a drop as well? Do we lose a family change room? Because I thought it looked like there were 2 in first option and then maybe 1 in this one. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So yes, there is a drop in overall number of private change rooms, but it's a bit tricky because it's not really an apples to apples comparison, right? So in the gender change rooms, you have the option to change in the common areas. So even though there is a loss in private change room, there's maybe actually a gain in like overall changing space for people who are comfortable with that, but it gives everyone the option based on their level of comfort, right? So anyone who is comfortable changing in front of people can do so in their specific gender change room, but anyone who doesn't and still wants to use a gender change room has the option to go in the stalls. Go back to your second question on family change room. So the stalls, Chris can explain this better than I can, but are sized for single, family, and universal. So a single change room would be where one person would go and get changed, although anecdotally, a lot of people can fit in there with their children and make it work. I've done it in mine several times. Whereas the family change room is sized for 2-3 people going in and changing together as a family. But the universal change room is actually for anyone with mobility needs or who requires a bit of assistance. So now we're, instead of one adult with 2 children, we're talking 2 adults with one of them helping the other person out. So, there is a need for an adult's change table in there. So it's a fairly large space that is needed. So because we do have we don't need to duplicate everything anymore in the revised concept, we just need one of those instead of 2 from the concept A, because everything had to be mirrored down that part on the other side of that partition.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, through your strength. Just wondering about when or which programs at what times would be the highest traffic, the most amount of people getting through this space, and who are they and what programs is it for, and any thoughts on how that plays out in the first design versus the second?
I might actually defer to Ms. Lamb on this one.
Thanks, Remy. So both floor plans have their pros and cons as it relates to delivery of programming. The morning weekdays are very busy with our adult programming and our parent taught. So kids who are not in school yet and our retirees or our adults who might be working shift work. So going from a 5-lane 25-meter pool to an 8-lane 25-meter pool, we will be looking at multi-programming the pool. So it's no longer just lap swim at this time. It could be a lap swim and an aquafit class going on, or it could be a parent taught lesson is happening in the leisure pool while aquafit is happening in the large pool. So you're going to see multiple types of customers coming through at the same time. So trying to understand the needs of each in the delivery of the change room is important. In terms of busyness, there's usually a lull in a pool Monday to Friday, I'll say between 1:30 or 2 o'clock till 3 o'clock. That's usually when you see shift changes. It's usually when seniors are looking to start to head home and end their day and prepare for the evening. And that's when a lot of the young children who are not in school, it's nap time. So those are the time periods where we would be looking operationally at changeovers, cleaning facilities, cleaning change rooms, shift changes, those types of things, and any possible private rentals that we may be able to attract. Possibly swim to survive programs with the school, those types of things. Starting at 3 o'clock, you get busy with your swim clubs and you get very busy with your starting into swimming lessons around 4 o'clock. And then into the evening, you start your adult programs into the pool again. So those are your adults who are working Monday to Friday during the day and maybe looking to get in the pool and get some exercise in the evening. So to say there's a very busy time, I would say the only lull that we're hoping for and planning for is that mid-afternoon lull. And then weekends are very busy when it comes to swim clubs throughout the morning and swimming lessons. And then you get into your public swimming and your Vivid birthday parties and all of those fun things. So as it relates to what change room might be better over the other, they both have their pros and cons. The having the double change room fully universal allows us to actually, around programming, shut one half of the washroom facility, the change room facility down and do cleaning during the day while the other one is still open and operational, where the model with the male-female universal doesn't allow us to do that. So with having those gaps in programming and ensuring we can keep up with business is important. However, having the 3 different change rooms meets a need if you've got a parent-taught swim happening and an aquafit class happening at the same time. What we need to be cognizant about is the size of the change rooms, the male and female. Those are not the same size they are today. They are smaller. And there may be some people that come in and say, the ladies' change room is very busy. I'm just going to go in and use a private stall in the universal change room. And that may suit their need. So there's still adequate changing space for everybody. And the alternative option meets the community's request that we've heard that they are still looking for some gender specific. But in the feedback, we also heard that a lot about we need family change rooms, and that's what we didn't have before. We just had the male female. So it's a roundabout answer, and I wish I could, Councillor Ernest, I wish I could give you a direct answer, but it really does depend on a customer. And I am confident that the option based on the space available, the alternative option will meet the need. It just means from a programming and operational perspective, we need to be a bit more cognizant about what we're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Council Project.
Sure, you were just to follow up on that. So you said something about space today. So compare it to the layout here, and whoever wants to compare it to what we've got now in terms of space. Is it going to be smaller, like the male version, and the female that's smaller? And just so I can put it in my head what we're looking at size wise.
I can certainly answer that, and Chris, feel free to jump in if I'm getting off track here. The current male and female change rooms are larger than the male and female changes in the alternative that's in front of you right now. But if you look at the full scope, including the universal, there's more change room space in the design being proposed than what we have today.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this portion?
Sorry.
Councillor Parks.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to I'm not sure who. Based on, and maybe stretching a little bit on this, based on the meets that happen, the swim meets that happen, what facility do most of the members of the swim meet use? Do they normally go into gender specific, or would they use a family? Like, I know it depends upon age groups, but I just wondered if the universal, like the option, would actually accommodate swim meets well.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The alternative in front of you right now allows us to utilize the 3 change rooms throughout a swim meet, where the swim club could do a few different things. They could actually, depending on how they're running the meet, they could assign teams to each individual change room. So men's, ladies, and universal changes to team A, B, and C. If there's more teams than that, then what they would do is do the male and female, and then the overflow would go through the universal. So we have certainly consulted with the Ernestown Barracuda Swim Club. There certainly is a request from them to have male and female specific, not just from a swim meet perspective, but also during their club practices. You know, they have swimmers coming and going at a variety of times where coaches are still on the deck, and they want to ensure that the safety of their children, that the females in the female dressing room and the males are in the male dressing room. So from a practice perspective, they certainly heard from them. They prefer the male female. From delivering a meet, we would have flexibility within the change room setup to work with the club to deliver the needs that they're going to need during that event. Because the facility will be set aside and private for them. So
thank you.
We'll have that flexibility to do what they're going to need to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I just have a couple questions. If this was mentioned, I missed it. The 2 versions, I'm assuming, are the exact same footprint, just divided differently. Okay. One of the comments that I read throughout the report, a few times it mentioned the doors were too short. They didn't go to the floor or whatever. And that was one of the reasons for the gender neutral area not really being all that popular with some people. I'm assuming that the doors, they wouldn't touch the floor, but I'm assuming that they go down far enough and up to be able to cover anybody that's changing inside. There's a standard size. Okay. Thank you. And you've already answered the other one, so we're good. Councillor
Do you have
Prager.
a break penciled in anywhere?
We can. How much?
2 minutes.
One quick question and then I'm good.
Councillor Prager.
Thank you. Through you, sir. So this going back to the FINA size and space, it just take me a moment to process that we have to have so much space on the floor for competitors get, we have to have space for 200 spectators. Something I've kind of pushed on, and it was noted in there, this would be kind of a great dual purpose for that walking track being halfway around or halfway up the wall around where the spectators could be, and then the deck space could be provided for all the competitors. It is something I've brought up many times, and I just wanted to throw that back out there to be on the record. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we can certainly look at that through validation. There are some concerns around the structural capacity of the existing outer shell of the existing pool. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. But we can certainly investigate that during validation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parks.
Sorry, just following up on Councillor Buderick's comments. I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in a lot of facilities and rinks and with the for the last number of years, and there's a few that have the walking tracks that are elevated. One's Dell Park in Oshawa, and I'm sure you guys have been in consultation with this, but I do like that idea that you could have a walking track maybe on an upper level and incorporate seating with that. Also, the Benson Arena in Cornwall just was there last weekend, and they actually have some elevated seating over top of their small soccer pitches that they have in there. So it's a fairly new facility. Councillor Broderick and I were just talking about it earlier, so it's fairly new facility. So Coburg Arena is another one that's fairly new that they've incorporated some of those options in. So if there's something we can do with that, that'd be great.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this portion? Seeing none, we'll call a recess for 10 minutes. Come back 7:45. Hey, everyone's here. We'll reconvene the meeting at 7:45. Yes, he's still online. Good. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So before we move on from this, the report does know that we will be looking for direction from council on which option to proceed with. So if that would be.
We'll deal with that at the end after the report is finished.
Okay, so yeah, and the reason we are looking for that direction is because that's something that we've answered at the conceptual level. The next section of the presentation deals about requests that we've heard, which we think can be accommodated, but we need to confirm that during validation because it'll take it to work. So we did talk about FINA pool standards, so we'll certainly be reviewing that. Same thing on pool depth, seating capacity, and handrails in the arena. These are all comments that we've heard that we think are completely reasonable, and we'll be investigating them in a bit more detail during validation to see how we can go about delivering them in a proper manner. Unfortunately, there's a last category, which is things that we can accommodate. So that includes the pool length and then the inclusion of a sauna or hot tub in the existing aquatic building. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we are very much constrained by our footprint expansion to 30%. So the aquatic facility that's presented in the conceptual design right now is 30% on the nose. Chris and his team have done a fantastic job of getting as much crammed into that program as possible, but going beyond that is really not possible at this time. And then going a bit more detail about the pool length on 25 versus 50, the costs associated with that expansion are pretty substantial. Capital costs themselves are double, as one would expect. And then same thing for operations, you're going through twice the volume of water, twice the chemicals, and then most importantly is staffing. Your staffing requirements actually go up as the size of the pool goes up, and there's some concerns around being able to attract enough lifeguards to staff the pool for the amount of time that it would need to be open. So we really can't recommend this at this time. In terms of the mini stick facility, so space constraints again are very limiting. And then there's some concerns around insurance and staffing with that facility as well. So, anecdotally, from what we heard from our colleagues in different municipalities, is they're having a hard time with their mini stick facilities, and they're considering shutting them down just because of they don't have the resources to allocate to supervising them at all times. So the walking track, the dedicated walking track is difficult to fit in at this phase of the project. Now that you bring up that comment about incorporating into the pool, that we can look at that because it's not increasing the footprint, but the walking track in the gym and fitness studio, again, we really can't be expanding the scope of the work to increase the footprint of the building. So we are limited to the size that we're presenting in this phase of the work. So in future phases of the project, certainly walking tracks and gyms and fitness studios can be accommodated, and the master plan feasibility study does discuss this and demonstrate that there is actually plenty of room on site to build them, but because of where we are in phase one of the urgency with which we must reopen the aquatic facilities, we just cannot be recommending that at this time. Any questions on design updates based on feedback?
Council Browder.
I just had one comment on, again, the walking track concept. Depending on how the arena, any changes there, I'm thinking of, if you can picture the scorer's box or whatever you want to call it. That thing wasn't there in off hours. You could have a decent little walking track around the arena. You know, obviously you're not going to be using it at the Jets Junior C game on a Sunday night, but I'm thinking of the off hours, like this morning when I was at senior skate, there was 4 of us in the building. You know, I don't know what, that's something down the road, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a really good point for you, Mr. Mayor. That jogged my memory. So the walking track, a dedicated walking track at this time is not possible, but there is currently a program being offered at the Recreation Center in partnership with Public Health, Walk for Life.
Yep.
Yeah, so Walk for Life, and we can look at building on that or expanding on that, and just creating markers and waypoints in proposed facilities so that people who participate in Walk for Life can continue to do so in a revamped facility, which will be a lot more engaging and inviting.
Council, any other questions or comments? Just a question, it was brought up about the walking track, the elevated walking track, and you mentioned that that could be a consideration. I'm assuming that during the validation report, that would be one of them, that if it was an option, it would come back with the additional cost and time delays and all of that would be built into the validation report?
Yes, it would certainly be built into the validation report for council consideration, yes.
Okay, thank you. And if there's no other questions or comments, please proceed.
Thank you. We're almost there. So in terms of next steps, so we talked about project delivery and we just wanted to get an update on that one. So we are in the process of finalizing our contractor for the project. So like we talked about, the township is the project owner, MJMA is the project architect and project designer. And the last piece of the puzzle is the contractor and potentially other parties, depending on whether their level of involvement. So we are in the process of procuring their services. Because of the size, the monetary value and complexity of this award for this project once it's awarded, in the interest of transparency and just being open and fair, we thought it would be appropriate to actually hire the services of an external third party to oversee the procurement process. So we reached out to the procurement office, who are a lawyer company based out of Toronto who specialize in procurement, to actually administer the request for proposal process on our behalf, just so that they can make sure that everything is done in a transparent manner. So because this is an IPD project, the way we are evaluating contractors is actually entirely based on qualification and experience. Who's the best person for the job? There's no way to fairly ask any component to submit a price on this sort of project, because we can't just pop a design in front of them and say, how much do you think this will cost? It's not fair, and if someone gives you a low price, that's not necessarily honest or fair either, right? So because of that, again, that's just another reason why we thought having someone oversee our procurement process would be prudent. And then what I will say is, because of the confidentiality of the process, the evaluating team can't really speak to how many bids we've gotten and who's been shortlisted. But council will certainly see the preferred component. And here's some timelines on how we're going about this. So the RFP was issued on Christmas Eve. It was a very busy day and a snowstorm. But we got it on Christmas Eve and it closed on February 14th. At which point the evaluation team was able to quickly turn around all the proposals that we received and identify the proponents to move on to the next step of the procurement competition, which would be closing confidential meetings. So a short list of proponents who met all the necessary requirements were invited to meet with the evaluation team and answer any questions that the team had and ask questions of themselves. So we just finished that last week on March 1st. And then based on the feedback received during those closing confidential meetings, the short list of proponents have the opportunity to revise their proposals and resubmit them, be evaluated against the same exact criteria. So the deadline for that will be March 16th, at which point the evaluation team has until March 21st to turn around the evaluations once again and identify the preferred proponent. Once that proponent is identified, we enter into contract negotiations, which could take anywhere from 10 days to 3 weeks. And we're hoping that we'll be able to come to council in April with a recommendation for to execute an agreement for the IPD team as a whole. So in terms of timelines, April 23, you can expect to see us back here with the proposed team, and then requesting that the CEO and the mayor be authorized to execute the agreement with the proposed IPD team. And the next day we'll be getting ready to work and starting the validation phase of the project and the development of the business plan. So we're anticipating that will be in front of you in the second half of 2023 with those two documents, at which point council will be able to give a no or no go for the project based on reliable information. And during that time, we'll continue with our public engagement and community consultation, just to make sure that as we make updates to the design, the stakeholders involved have the ability to say whether or not it meets their needs. So they'll be seeing, we'll continue that process, and we'll be continuing with Indigenous engagement as well. So the community will be hearing from us as well, and we really do encourage anyone watching who hasn't signed up for the project email list to do so. Just because we will be providing updates through that medium as much as possible, as well as social media on the township website. And then, depending on how things go at the presentation of the validation reports, we'll be moving right into design and procurement, and hopefully breaking ground either late this year or early next year. The GICP grant program does have a mandatory completion date of March 2026, so we'll be aiming to have everything done by the end of 2025 and the facility operational by then. But those timelines will be presented in with more detail, with a bit more certainty during the validation report at that time. And that's it from us. Happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
Thank you. Council, any questions, comments on what we've received? Councilor Pryor.
Can I ask questions on the actual report as opposed to the presentation?
Why don't we finish the presentation and then we'll go to the report,
Okay.
if that's okay, just to keep it clear. So on the presentation, any further questions or comments? I just have a couple. During the decision-making for bringing a contractor on board, do they provide, there'd be a few items depending on the company that you know that they would have subs in that. Do they bring is that identified at this stage, or is that at later date once we're further down the design process?
And that's a really good question, and you hit it on the head as to why it was so difficult writing that RFP. So the way to look about there's several ways to go about it, right? So you could theoretically find a general contractor who has the staff and the workforce to build the whole thing from start to finish, but that doesn't mean that's the best value, right? So a company based in Western Canada could fly in their crews to come work here, but that wouldn't be a good value for money, in which case they would subcontract out a lot of that work. But because we don't have enough detail at this stage to say what kind of subcontractors are needed, it's not really realistic to expect them to name them at this point, right? So you think about the addition of the new aquatic facility, maybe it's an entirely glass building, maybe it's a wooden building with some glass on it. Different subcontractors would be needed to do the different options, right? So you can't really name them at this point. The way we got around that is we asked the proponents to demonstrate their ability to act as a general contractor in this case, right? So based on their previous experience, have they built pools, have they built aquatic facilities, have they built arenas? How do they go about it, and how are they going to do the same thing for our project? So the responses that we've been getting have been more than satisfactory, and we're quite pleased with what we've been seeing. But again, it goes back to just their ability to, at the very least, act as a general contractor and oversee any subcontractors or partners that might be needed.
Thank you. That actually makes perfect sense. Thank you. Sorry, my background might skew some of your thinking on this. I also, you'd mentioned that at this point, it's solely, because we don't know what we're building yet, solely on qualifications, and there was another term in there, references or something like that. And from my history, I think that's where you end up getting the best product. I've come to learn that, awarding lowest contract means you get the cheapest job. Hiring someone that's qualified and doing it this way, I really like the idea of that. The price is going to be for this project, and it'll be the best price, not trying to undercut. And we'll know going forward, and we're going to have the best qualified, not just the lowest price in the last time. So I like that. And as far as the procurement office, I read that, I was stumped, took a little Googling. I never knew they existed, but that is pretty neat. I'm really glad that they're on board. The expertise that I saw online would really validate the process up to the hiring stage, I think, for the contractor. So council, any other questions or comments on the presentation? Seeing none. Thank you for the presentation, very informative. And now we will go to the report. Councillor Project, you had some questions or comments on that?
Yeah, to you, your worship, just a couple of things sort of caught my eye on page 6. I'm just wondering, and I'll read the line to you. This may be a moot point at this stage, but I'm not sure. And the city of Kingston have re-engaged in discussions around a potential partnership. Can you maybe expand on that a bit?
I might defer to Ms. Lamb on this one.
And if I may, it's probably best to give her to Councilor one of Director. She's been leading that discussion.
I guess my question sort of, is that a programming thing or is that something to do with the capital side of things? I'm not sure what was inferred there. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In 2019, we applied for a grant. And as part of that grant, we had to securing partnerships was very, very key to the success of that grant. And we secured a partnership with the city of Kingston to fund or provide funding for roughly 25% of the municipal share of that aquatic facility. At the time, it worked out to about 1.5 million. The city has reached out. Unfortunately, we were not successful with that grant. As soon when the funding was announced that we were successful here, the city has reached out to see if there's any chance of having looking at a partnership. And we're currently our new CAO is going to be meeting shortly with the city of Kingston CAO to discuss some of those possibilities.
So if I can just follow up. So is that more of on the programming side of things, or is it more of?
It's more capital.
Okay, thank you. And I've got one more your work.
Yes.
And this is my background in my previous life. I'm just wondering on page 7, there's a glaring absence of one local school board, and I'm wondering if they just declined to be involved. I don't know who wants to answer that. It's where is that? Second bullet, a workshop with aquatic groups, and the Limestone District School Board. So there's one board missing there that I'm aware of. I'm just wondering, did they decline or do we even know?
The individuals that attended that session were based on our previous renters and program individuals who attended the facility. So it was based on past history. It doesn't mean that moving forward, we wouldn't be able to talk about that one.
Fair enough. Thank you. And just a couple of maybe statements, and I think you've done a good job, a really good job here of some of the questions that I heard, like, the railing, accessibility. The one question with public transit, is that more of that, as it is now, public transit maybe doesn't serve Odessa, and sort of is that what, because obviously there's a bus stop right in front of the facility.
Yeah, those were those comments that came out through the consultation, but about people residing in Bath and Odessa and Sound. Identified that one of the barriers to them going to the facility was a lot of public transit.
And just again, a lot of the questions that I read in your report, I think a lot, maybe it's down the road with programming more than anything, tennis courts, et cetera, things that everybody wants, but they're not within the scope of this project. So maybe that's something down the road, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Willis.
Small details, I know, but in the current facility, there's a lot of space that's allocated to display of trophies and memorabilia. Is that part of the plan going forward as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what we're hoping to accomplish with the social heart is to celebrate everything in Loyalist Township, and going back in time as far as several thousand years ago, right? So, but that includes celebrating our British sports history. So, the intent would be, as we go through validation, we would be looking to form a group with community members to figure out how best to go about using that space to accomplish that goal.
Any other questions or comments for discussion from council? Seeing none. Thank you. I believe I've through the whole evening, I think I received answers to all the questions that I had as well, which, wow, good presentation then, because it's really marked up. So council, we have the report, we've received the information, and we have a recommendation, which is surrounding the change rooms. Are there any further questions or comments on that? Or are we ready for a motion?
I'd be pleased to make a motion.
Please.
That the revised male-female universal change room concept for the aquatic facility be incorporated in the conceptual design for the community health.
Part two. That's part two.
No, it's part one.
Sorry. The revised, yes. Okay, with item one. So moved. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Willis. Wish to speak to it, mover?
Sure. I think, change is hard on people, and I think the community has pretty well made it clear that they're not in favor of the universal design. Not to say that, in the future things may change, but I think in that one area, that was one where I personally heard a lot of input from people, and I think that's this is the time to make that change and listen to what the residents are asking.
Thank you. Seconder, any comments? Anyone else? I'd just echo, I did receive feedback on that item as well. Some of it I think was changed, some of it was possibly not fully understanding the privacy in the individual rooms. But either way, we want the users to be happy. We want them to be comfortable coming and using the facility. And with the footprint staying the same, it doesn't impact our, doesn't raise any concerns with the funding either. And I guess the one thing that was a clincher for me was when the statement was made that the Barracuda Club, the actual swim club, preferred the separated rooms. Then that helped make my mind up there that if when we're building this for meets and for that as well as the residents, in general, that was a big decision maker for me. So, and with that, back to the mover for final comment. Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is passed. Thank you. So that takes care of that one. So all that's left is a motion to adjourn. Councillor Willis, seconded by Councillor Ennis. All in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is passed. We are adjourned. Thanks.